Welcome back to another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer, and today we are continuing to celebrate March Madness with our Rebound series of episodes. And I've had a lot of guests on this show that we've recorded, that we have, we've done some and flipped them around the next day, but there has not been a guest that I've been this excited to sit down and talk to in terms of just having fun with this person, because I connected with her a couple of weeks back. We had an amazing conversation. We were sitting here talking a moment ago, and we're like, if we don't hit record, we're going to be on here for a couple more hours without even getting anything onto the air. But I am here today with Jamie Valvano. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining the Shadows Podcast.
Oh, I'm thrilled. As you said, there was an instant connection once we started talking. I think we had so much in common, and I agree. This is a time to celebrate. There's so much swirling on around us, and so I'm looking forward to just having some fun today.
Yeah, and she is an inspirational speaker and advocate. She is a cancer survivor, and her last name may ring a bell if you're familiar with sports. So we'll get to that in just a second. But ma'am, we're going to start off with some rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
Hope you're ready. I kind of like tipped you off to one just a moment ago.
No sports questions. I'm not an expert. Don't ask me anything.
Scratch. So first question for you. You and Grant have some amazing workouts. What is your workout music?
Oh gosh, our trainer. So Grant is let everybody know, Grant's my son, who's my workout partner. And 3 years ago, we started on this workout journey together. And our trainer, Daniel, picks the music, but by far the 1980s come on and we just go crazy. We love, my son's favorite one is Cyndi Lauper. And so that just cracks me up. So anytime an 80s song comes on, we just take it up a notch, because that gets our juices flowing.
What's his go-to Cyndi Lauper song?
Oh, Time After Time, of course.
Okay.
But I mean, he'll do Madonna. He knows Michael Jackson. He knows all the bands. I mean, he is, my kind of guy.
That's good. I actually, this morning was 80s music for me when I worked out. So that was weird how that synced up. You could jump on a plane and travel to one place right now. Where would it be?
Oh gosh, without a doubt, it would be New Jersey, because my younger sister, who is 8 years younger than me, and my brother-in-law, Bo, and my niece and nephew live in Maplewood, New Jersey. They moved there a year ago, bought a new house, and very close to her. And I haven't seen them in over a year because of COVID. And there's no destination that I would want to go to see their new home and to be with them and celebrate. So I'm missing them terribly. It's so hard because kids change so much from year to year, and I'm missing this time. So that's where I would go, and I'd grab maybe as much family as I could, and we would pack that jet and head on out.
Okay. What is your go-to motivation book, or what is a book, in terms of motivating somebody, inspiring somebody? If you were to point that book in someone's direction, what would it be?
It's funny, because I'm challenging myself right now to actually try to write a book. And what helps me more than any self-help books really are kind of memoirs, when you gain insight into a person's life, and it allows you to take away what you need. And there are a couple people who are really close to me that wrote memoirs, and one of them is Playing Hurt by John Saunders, who was my dad's partner at ESPN. Yeah. Another one is Stuart Scott's memoir that he wrote, that he was also someone at ESPN that really supported my dad and battled his own cancer. And, those are the type of books that touch me, and not necessarily because I know those individuals, but it's because they are brutally honest and authentic about their journey. And so for me, I could name probably 10 more that I've read that are someone's life story that have touched me. But that's, to me, it's, it's not so much about a marketing book or someone who writes something about how they became successful. Those are very inspiring, but I like kind of that underdog, come from behind, person who's really faced some hard tragedies and yet allows you some insight into how, they not only survived, but thrived. And so, those are two that I highly recommend, especially if you are a sports fan, because they reveal so much. And another sports book, I could go on and on, but is John Feinstein wrote a book called Legends. And it's a book about my dad and Dean Smith and Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. And it kind of captures that time period when my dad was coaching with the two of them. And if you're at all an ACC basketball fan, a basketball fan at all, it is a must read. It is hysterical. And there were so many stories that I had never heard since I wasn't privy to my dad's day-to-day work life. And I cried, I laughed. It was just such a fun adventure. So that'd be another one by John Feinstein that I would highly recommend.
When we talked, a couple of weeks ago, you had told me a story, if you don't mind sharing it, about Coach K and your dad with Dean Smith in a meeting. If you don't mind resharing that one.
Well, it's so interesting because Mike Krzyzewski from Duke came to the ACC at the same time that we did. They were around the same age. He has 3 daughters. My dad had 3 daughters. So right away, they were kind of pitted against each other. But, I was so young, I really didn't know, the legend and the god that Dean Smith was. And so when these 2 young coaches came, Mike Krzyzewski and my dad, everybody let them know at the coaches meetings, the ACC meetings, nobody talks to Dean. You don't sit at his table. You don't, he's his own entity. And he comes in at the last moment and, everybody else just kind of defers to him. And, my dad wasn't going to have any of that. He just knew that his sense of humor was just never ending. And so the story that John Feinstein tells that I'm retelling, because I had never heard it, was that at one of the ACC meetings where all the coaches were going to spend some time together, they bribed kind of, one of the guys that was working in the hotel to come and get them once Dean had arrived. And my dad and Mike Krzyzewski hid in the bathroom and actually waited for Dean so that they would be the last to arrive and make a big entrance. So Dean Smith came in, and then my dad and Coach K came in, and my dad just went right over to his table and sat down like, "Hey, how's it going?" And so John Feinstein does such a great job of kind of capturing the personalities. And what's so amazing for me, and I knew this because as I grew older, was the 3 of them came to really like each other, respect each other. Our families were close and still are. And so to just kind of hear those stories about, when I think at the time my dad was in his 30s, so he was so young, and he was fun. He wanted to have fun with all of this. So he didn't really play by the rules. And so there's so many funny stories like that in there that just make me chuckle, because I know he's not exaggerating. I know that that's something that my dad would have done. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you think the 3 fan bases get along like those 3 coaches did?
Oh gosh, no. I remember one of my favorite memories too is when they were closing Carmichael, which was the where UNC played, and they were opening up the Dean Dome, and my dad's team, I think we lost, and so they were going off the floor, and he took a basketball from the referee and made a layup. And so the news was that my dad had made the last basket, this historical last basket that you would want in Carmichael. And these UNC fans were just like, what? Well, why did anyone let him do that?
He made Dean Smith watch it. He pulled Dean Smith back to the court and went and made a layup. And then during the press conference, he's like, just so y'all put in the the box score, I was the last person to make a basket at Carmichael.
History. So, I think that we could talk, forever about the relationship between my dad and Coach K, because that was the one that lasted far beyond coaching. And I think they really became close friends after. I think when you're competing and when you're, playing against each other, and they were kind of pitted because they were the same age, and ACC basketball is so insane, the rivalries anyway. Yeah. So, yes, people still come up to me. I mean, if I wear a blue shirt, or if I have any inclination that I'm a fan of any other team, people think that, what? How could you even say that? but I'm like, gosh, we're friends with these coaches, and they support the V Foundation, the work that we do. And so people don't understand that, there's anything outside of basketball. So no, I don't think the fans mix much.
Yeah, it's funny because when I found out I was going to be talking to you, and I was trying to get some questions from people, I was reaching out to a lot of NC State friends of mine, and then the Carolina fans are like, "You have someone from NC State? NC State? It's
how dare you?"
But I remember living there because I grew up, and we would even during like the ACC tournament. And for those of you who are not familiar with ACC basketball, oh my gosh, they would roll the TV. This is telling my age. They would roll a TV into the class.
Yes.
And at 12 o'clock, they would turn on the ACC tournament.
Yeah.
And in class, you would watch the ACC tournament, or my parents would just keep me at home. They were.
It was like a religion. I mean, it wasn't anything that we were used to growing up in New York, and it was just it was so overwhelming. People were so over the top. And what I did find, or what I've heard over the years, is that even though people might have been Carolina fans or Duke fans, something about my dad, it's like they loved to hate him, or they loved him, or whatever, but he kind of like made them think and past. And then of course, in '83, they can't say that wasn't an exciting win. So, I think he kind of transcended basketball towards the end of his life. But yeah, oh gosh, yeah, religion that I never, the competition was crazy.
My parents, my dad especially, and we've talked about our families before, but my dad was a diehard Tar Heel fan. Tar Heels basketball. It took me a long time I was raised watching him sit through these games. So I thought I had to react the same way to games, but it was getting my blood pressure up. And the older I've got, the more I'm like, they lost.
It's okay.
But he hated Duke and State.
Yes.
But he liked your dad. And my mom liked your dad. They were like, my mom, I was talking to her. She's like, you can't not like him. He's funny. He's got tons of charisma. And and she still refers to the Sports Illustrated article from 93 with, he just wants to walk barefoot in the grass and feel the trees. And I would tell anyone out there listening, if you are not familiar with Jim Valvano, go look him up in YouTube, Google him. You will find some amazing things. The one story that I actually have right here, it was actually a quote. He said, and you've probably heard this one. He said, "I asked a ref if he could give me a technical foul for thinking bad things about him. He said, 'Of course not.' I said, 'Well, I think you stink.' And he gave me a technical. You can't trust him."
The sense of humor that he had was just ever present in our home all the time. It just came naturally to him. I mean, from an early age, he would, in Catholic school, he would get in trouble, or he would entertain the nuns. I mean, that's just who he was. I feel like he could have been a comedian or a movie star on top of it. But humor was just definitely so quick-witted and witty, funny, and always had us laughing. And so sometimes he would exaggerate for the sake of, telling a funny story, but most of the time there was a kernel of truth in the craziness and the things that he would do and say, where you would just, and because of that charisma, people it didn't get him in as much trouble as it probably should have.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because I've always been a fan of his storytelling and how he acts it out, and you feel like you're there. And so I took a lot of that with me when I started. I exaggerate stories, but it reminds me of the quote. I think it's Mark Twain, but it was, "Never let the truth get in the way of a good story." And even my going away plaque from me being an Airman Leadership School instructor, they had, "Never let the truth get in the way of a good story." So yeah, you kind of mentioned it. What in the world was it like growing up in that house?
It's interesting because, and I've reflected a lot on this, it's almost like two childhoods we had. Okay. So when we lived in New Rochelle, my dad was a coach at Iona College, and all of our family was around, all of our extended families, all of his cousins, aunts, uncles, and his parents lived in Seaford, Long Island. He had 2 brothers. And so, growing up till about the age of 8 or 9, we were always surrounded by family. I mean, the men were gathered around a small TV with, some kind of bunny ears, and they would just be screaming about some sporting event and a referee, and the kids would be running around, and the wives would be making, just copious amounts of food that they would lay out. And that was it for every weekend. I mean, this wasn't a special event. We were always surrounded by family. So when my dad came to our, my family and said, we're moving to North Carolina, a place called, Raleigh, North Carolina, in 1980, we were shocked because we didn't know anything existed outside of New York. That's where all our family lived. And we were led to believe it was, kind of illegal to, go away from your family and travel. And so we moved here. And in 1980, there were not a lot of Northern people that living in our area. The landscape is so different now in, 2021, but there weren't people with names like ours that ended in vowels that sounded like us. I mean, they would call my dad, the Italian. And immediately after his first press conference, he kind of proved that he not only knew basketball, but also was a born entertainer. Everybody knew who he was because the name was so distinct, the way he sounded was distinct. And so all of a sudden we went from just being surrounded by family all the time to now almost being like in a fishbowl where everybody would watch us all the time. And I remember the very first week we moved in, my older sister, she was riding her bike. She flipped over the handlebars and cut open her chin. And my parents had to take her to the emergency room. She was, 9 at the time or something when we moved. And so the doctor called my dad back. I mean, again, immediately knew who he was and said to him, sorry, Coach V, but we had to stitch her up with Carolina blue thread. And my dad said, without missing a beat, that's okay. She bled state red, doc. And I'm looking here as this child going, what are they talking about? This is absolutely insane. So I didn't know what a Blue Devil was, or Tar Heel, or Cavalier. I had no idea what any of this is. So honestly, it kind of, the second part of my childhood was my dad kind of living this life as a coach and a larger than life personality and being on television and all of this. And then we were just home and our life was normal. We went to, school, and we were friends with neighbors, and it was just a normal childhood. And it just so happened that we had to go to basketball games all the time and watch my dad do what he did for a living. So just like, someone else might have a dad who works at IBM or just, as a salesperson, my dad was a coach. So I really never understood, as you said, the teachers, everybody was just so into it at school, and people would like toilet paper our house or write things on my locker or my car. And I was not, people just don't, they can't believe this, but I wasn't an athlete and I wasn't a huge sports fan. So I really didn't get what all the hubbub was about. So honestly, people are like, oh, it must've been so exciting. It must've been thrilling. And it really wasn't. It was, for me, it was kind of like, I hope we win so my dad's in a good mood. And if we lose, you just avoid him at all costs. But it obviously for me, the older I got, the more moved I was by watching my dad coach, because to see someone, as a teenager, but to see my dad being so passionate and caring so much about what he did, basketball wasn't just something that he did for a living, but it was our life. And so that really started to kind of plant a seed inside me and change me as I grew older. But, the one thing I will say about my dad is, in our family, he was kind of like the sun, and he provided the warmth for all of us. Whenever he was home, his 3 daughters we were the most affectionate, hand-holding, hugging, kissing family. People would say, this is just sick. You guys are always all over your dad, but we're Italian. That's what you do. So very affectionate family. And everything we did when my dad was around was fun. There was always laughter. There was just always this sense of adventure when he was around. And so he was pretty much the same at home as you saw out in the public. There was no off switch. I mean, this was who he was. He was it wasn't like he was putting on a show.
He wasn't an introvert when he got home. He was.
No. The only thing that I share with people we've touched on, because I know you have daughters as well, is, each one of us, his three girls, we did have a separate relationship with him that I
Right.
will say. And, my oldest sister was an athlete. She played sports and she was all in. She was the ball boy for my dad. She was at every practice, every camp, every game. I could care less. But the thing that we shared, my dad and I, was, a lot of people don't know, he was an English major, and he was a prolific reader, and he loved poetry especially. And
Wow.
so I became an English teacher, and I got my love of poetry from him. So that's something we shared.
Yeah.
So people don't know that about him, is one summer he decided he'd read all the great works of Shakespeare. And so he would just be, quoting King Lear as we passed him in the hallway, or he was always reading something. He loved, Emily Dickinson and Thoreau and E.E. Cummings. I mean, so that's the special bond that we shared. And I remember for my 17th birthday, he gave me a little book of Shakespearean sonnets that I still have on my, on my dresser. And so those are the things that I hold close to me, because everybody knows my dad was a basketball coach, or they might remember the SB speech, or they might know about the V Foundation. But to me, my dad was a poet. That's who he was in those quiet moments. And so I really think that's, how I remember him most.
Yeah. Wow. That's an awesome story. I didn't know that.
Yes.
What was like one memory that really stands out at the house that someone may not have heard about your dad that you just think back and just can't help but laugh?
Oh God, people have probably heard all of these. He's there's so many funny ones that I can't even. I remember he was announcing at one of the Olympic Games, and he invited my sister and I to come with him. It was in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And we were fairly young, and we went without my mom. Just the two of us flew with him, and we were going to see some of the figure skating or whatever was going on. And I remember after hours, we climbed a fence, the three of us, and broke into the pool so that we could go swimming. And I was like, Dad, this is probably not cool. He's like, oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. He used to do, this is disgusting. I can't even believe I'm sharing it. But the one thing that my mom used to get so mad at was he had it, if he would pass a tray that was outside of a room in a hotel and they hadn't touched some of the food, he would eat it. He was fine. He'd say, they didn't even touch this chocolate cake. So
he's a coach at NC State. He can.
I was like, really? That's just a funny story. And I think that watching my dad interact with the Southern, from growing up here, it was it was hysterical for me to watch, because I had a little bit of both cultures in me, but my dad was all Northern Italian. And so to watch him, he would put on the red ultra suede jacket and the Wolfpack tie and the red checkered pants, and he would have to go to pig pickings, and he'd never been to a pig picking before. He didn't know what it was. And I remember the very first year, the Wolfpack Club said to him, you need to meet us in Greenville. You're actually at a pig picking. You're going to speak to a bunch of donors and people that are in members of the Wolfpack Club. So he goes to the event, and he's in the airport, and one of the Wolfpack Club members calls him and says, "Where are you, Coach? We're here at the airport to pick you up." And he said, "Well, I'm here. It's Greenville. It says right here I'm where I'm supposed to be." And it turned out he had flown to Greenville, South Carolina for the event. And they said, "Coach, you're coach at NC State at North Carolina. Why would you fly to the wrong state?" And he was like, "Oh, I don't know." He's like, "I just said Greenville and I went." So there were funny things like that, to see him get acclimated into the culture and the community, and to see him interact with people. It was just hysterical, because, he was himself and he was authentic, but he really stood out as we were growing up. Like, yeah, that's my dad. He was so loud, and wherever we went, you knew that he was in the room. So you couldn't fly under the radar. So if you were a shy person, or if you were we'd go to Greek restaurants, and next thing you know, he'd be breaking plates and saying, oompa, oompa, and like dancing and stuff. I was like, oh my gosh. So it's just like this larger than life personality. Yeah. When you're just like, really, Dad? So it was always fun, but it was always, like I said, there wasn't an off switch. I mean, it was just always this larger than life entity. And so, growing up, you never knew you could only breathe a sigh of relief when he was recruiting or somewhere, that was sleeping. Your downtime before you had to get going again.
You took a nap or something. That's when you got your downtime.
I don't know. There's always moving, always thinking. He had this mind. That's the one thing that I now that I'm exactly his age or when he passed away. And so I think about how this was before technology. So what he would do when he thought of something, an idea or a vision or something, he would write it on like little pieces of paper or sticky notes. And so my mom would just pull them out of his jacket and his pants, and there'd be hundreds of them. It was like A Perfect Mind, that movie, because he always was thinking of something. And I remember a reporter asking him one time, why are you involved in so much? Like, why don't you just coach? Why do you have to do, a radio show or this or that and the other? And he says, because I can. That was his answer. And so I think he, was kind of like a Renaissance man in that he thought, I can do all this, so I want to. And so it was tough. He was, busy all the time. But I just remember, there were always ideas, always thoughts, always dreams and visions that were going on. And so I can remember those, whenever I see a Post-it note, I just think about him, because that was, what he would have all over the house.
Yeah. Was it you plus motivation equals success?
Yep.
So simple, but so true. And he gave a speech. I encourage everyone out there listening, it's on YouTube. It's not just his ESPY speech, but it was a speech he gave in like 1987, I believe. But he talks about that. He also we were talking earlier about packing your suitcase, and it's just a remarkable speech, and his charisma just exudes from him. He's amazing speaker, and like you said, just tons of energy. Oh my gosh.
Stories. Yep.
What was funny is when I was talking to you a couple of weeks ago, we were sitting here just telling stories back and forth. You're like, I've never heard that. You're like, there's so many stories of him out there. The one that I really liked, and I was telling my girls about it this morning, was when I believe it was in his book where he was talking about how they were at a banquet. I think it was at Rutgers. They were at a banquet, and one of the guys that was with him was trying to write his speech the night before. And your dad was just sitting back, not even doing anything. And he's like, why are you so stressed out, to the other guy? And he's like, I can't figure out what I'm going to talk about at this banquet tomorrow night. And he said, talk about, and I'm going to get it wrong, but just talk about like followership. And he's like, okay, followership. Got it. And he said the next day they go there, and the guy's still nervous, and he's going through his note cards, looking at him. And your dad walks up to him and he's like, hey, I'm going to break the ice. I'll go first. And he's like, oh, thank you so much. And your dad gets up there and he's like, everybody, thank you for coming out tonight. So I'm going to talk to you today about followership. And
that's just threw the cards up in the air.
So the guy was over there like erasing all frantically, like trying to think of what he was going to rewrite about, but just stories like that. So I encourage everybody, if you're feeling down or you need like a little boost, just throw him in Google, and I can guarantee you are going to feel 10 times better. I mean, last night when I was sitting here looking up stuff, I was supposed to be looking up all this stuff on you, and I found myself watching his videos and just
me too. I do the same thing. I go down that, wormhole. And the other day I found one where he was in 83. He actually spoke to the senators when he was asked, a group of senators, when he was asked to go to the White House to meet President Reagan after they won the national championship. And I think the other thing that was kind of warm-hearted about my dad was he didn't really take himself too seriously, and that sense of humor. And so one of my favorite stories is when he's getting ready to meet the president, and that's a huge deal. This skinny Italian kid from Long Island who, this is not something that we did often. We didn't get to meet famous people. And so right before they were getting ready to go on the air, this is when politics, I think, was still funny, and you could make jokes. President Reagan leaned in and whispered, is it Valvano or Valvano, how you pronounce your name? And he said, well, President, it's Valvano. That's how you pronounce it. And then without, just like a beat later, he tapped the president on it and he said, is it Reagan or Reagan? It's like right before they're getting ready to go on television for him to kind of like bestow on my dad this honor. And I thought, you wise, you know what, like to ask the president of the United States, you know how to pronounce his name? But he just like, that's what, that's how funny and fun and quick-witted he was, and how he didn't take anything so seriously. And so I love reliving those stories of it reminds me in the midst of everything that we're going through, people, sometimes will say like, what do you think your dad would think about this or that or the other? And I always say humor. No matter what he was facing, he was always laughing, always joking, always having fun. That's how we survived good times in our house growing up. And that's how we survived some of the difficult ones. And, there were jokes that you just are like, this is an inappropriate time for you to make a joke, but he would do it. I mean, that's just how he was.
Just breaks the ice.
Yeah. Humor played a huge part in his life and really was a constant in our home.
Yeah. And one thing I found out, doing some research is, and just to throw out, his accolades, and we're going to get to one of these accolades here in just a minute. But, he did grow up idolizing Vince Lombardi. And if y'all have not heard his story, the Rutgers Green Bay Packers story, which, I mean, had my wife dying over here listening to this thing the other day. And I was telling her, I was like, he is not feeling well when he's telling this story, but he is so in the moment that I don't even think it bothered him. And it was an incredible story. So if you want a good laugh, go listen to him tell that story. But he played at Rutgers. He coached at Johns Hopkins. He was assistant at UConn. He head coached at Bucknell, Iona, NC State in 1980. He got there and he won the ACC tournament in 83 and 87, beat Tar Heels both times. He won the ACC regular season title in 85 and 89. He was also the ACC Coach of the Year in 89, which, I mean, if you look at who was coaching in the ACC at that time, that's a big deal. That is a really big deal. And he was also athletic director at NC State. But one thing that really stood out to me, more so than all of that, and it makes me fast forward like to 2021, but he had his radio show where he would actually announce like the top 25, and he would take call. There's a clip on there. It's so funny because someone calls, and, coaches now, it's, what do you think of this team? And, it's, well, they got a good coaching. You play it really safe. Someone calls in on the show and they said, Notre Dame has to be the most boring team in the country. And he's like, and I'm thinking, no, he's going to disagree or play it safe. He's like, I got to totally agree with you. They are the most boring team out there right now. But he would take calls from people because he just wanted to talk to them. And then he had his show where he went around like interviewing people around campus. And for those of you who probably don't even remember this, but they would have like the Coach K show, the Dean Smith show. They would have all the coaches' shows, and they would come on. I think it was like Sunday morning or Saturday, but he would go around campus, and he was like, I learned so much about the people around campus just by going and doing this. And then motivational speaker. He was really, when you think about it, way ahead of his time, because can you imagine him in 2021 with podcast, with social media, with how many people he would be connected? It is amazing that he was doing all that in the early 80s.
He was one of the first coaches, which just always shocks me, to get a sneaker deal, to work with Phil Knight at Nike. Yeah. And in the beginning stages when, that was something that was new, where your team would, you'd sign with a sneaker company. And he was one of the first coaches to get a big deal, with that. He, I know, was one of the first speakers that, became a motivational speaker with the Washington Speakers Bureau, which now, if you see who they have on their roster, and, it's just those kind of things. And then, to see him transition from coaching and having been so successful, and then, a year or two into sports commentating, he wins a Cable Ace Award for that. So, it just, I 100% agree with you. I would love to see what he'd be doing now, because, he definitely saw like a bigger picture. He wasn't just, which, people criticized him for that, just being all over the place. But again, that's how his mind worked. He was interested in so much more than just coaching. And so again, with that, maybe in 1980s and 1990s, that wasn't, the norm, but now that is. I mean, you have to have social media and you have to have all of this. And so he would have thrived in that, that environment because he loved it.
I would have followed him on Twitter quicker than anybody else. Well, I got to ask you this. You may not even remember it. NC State, I can't remember. I think it was like 89 or somewhere around there. But they had this deal where they had to wear like singlets or like but he came out wearing one.
I know, not good. Not good.
It was like a unitard uniform. Yeah. I remember Corciani had it on, and they were. Oh,
I don't know. Yeah, I do remember it, but I don't know why that occurred or what that was about. But yes, he definitely
didn't catch on.
No, thank God.
Fab Five baggy shorts caught on. The unitard. But I remember I saw a clip or something. But he came out on the court at practice wearing it.
Oh.
And and he had like a chain around his neck with it. It was.
No. That's I'm glad we don't have a record of that. That's all over the place. But yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he had fun with it. I couldn't imagine Dean Smith doing it.
I remember he was on local commercials, and it just absolutely it felt like it was nothing. There was nothing he couldn't do. Even if some of the ideas were not 100% successful.
Like I said, I couldn't imagine Coach K or Dean Smith doing that. But it's funny because even like the course I teach, there's certain lessons where we talk about introverted personalities and extroverts, and for an introvert, they're like an internal battery source. They like to charge from within. Extroverts are like solar panels, and they get it. Their energy. His solar panel was so big, and he was getting it from so many to where he was go, go, go. And some people can look at it and they're like, wow, I totally see where he's coming. Some people are like, it's, oh my gosh, that's so exhausting. But he just thrived in it.
I think it's exhausting if you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
And, one of the things that was so great about my dad, and I'm not like this, but is he really valued people over anything. I would see him talking to people and interacting with people when they'd come up to meet him. And what I would take as, you're bothering us, or you're basically, he would ask questions. He would want to know people. And, as I traveled with him when he worked for ESPN and ABC, I mean, you're right. I mean, he wanted to hear people's stories. He wanted to know something about them. And till this day, people that have met him will say, I was a student at NC State, or I worked at the airport, whatever. And we ran into your dad. They always, I'd say 99.9% have a fond memory of the exchange that they had. And so, that's really important to. Nobody should feel bad if they're not somebody who has to have that energy around them all the time. But if you're doing it just to somehow be seen, or because you want everybody to like you or whatever, that's different. I mean, my dad did it, as you just said, because it was part of his DNA. He could not have survived without having a public and people and sports and somebody to listen and talk to and bounce ideas off of. It's just who he was. So even when we were on vacation, he wasn't the type that would want to be left alone and be in isolation. He wanted to meet people that were working at the hotel or in the restaurant, or, and it's just who he was all the time. Absolutely.
Well, another thing that really defined who he was the 1983 cardiac pack team. And I mean, even for me as a Tar Heel, I love this story. And to kind of paint a picture to leading up to Albuquerque, they were like 17-10, 8-6 in the ACC. And there's actually, I got to tell a little story with that. Him and Dean Smith said that your dad would always say, look, I just want to go 8-6. I want to have a winning record in the ACC. And Dean Smith would reply back with, so you're fine with 6 losses. That's okay. So it just shows that banter they had. But they beat Wake Forest by 1 point in the ACC tournament. Then a Michael Jordan North Carolina team. They beat them in overtime. And then the ACC Championship with Ralph Sampson. And this is when Virginia was really, really dominant as well. They beat them by 3 points. They go to the NCAA tournament. Do you remember kind of that time frame? Was he automatically like, oh, we've got momentum rolling, we've got something special here?
Oh, no.
No.
I was the most superstitious person in the world. So he would never have said like, oh yeah, we got this or whatever. I mean, if we were on a winning streak, he had to wear the same socks, underwear, suit, tie. I mean, and so one of the crazy things that happened that year was because those games were all so down to the wire, nail biter kind of games, my mom could not take it. My mom was just like, she needed to be medicated. I mean, she said, this is horrible. I can't take these. So she would leave with 2 minutes left on which was that's when my dad came alive, was those last couple of minutes of the game. You know, we could be down by 20 and somehow we came back that year and won with 2 minutes left. I'm like, what's happening? So she would take me and my sisters out and we would stand in the hallway. So once he found out we were doing that and we started winning, we had to do that every game. So Packers who would watch the clock and would like point to my mom and be like, out, like 2 minutes, you got to go, get out there. So yeah, I mean, he was always super focused, always super emotional and intense, but I don't remember him ever being like overly confident where like, we've got this, but he was, the best way to describe him is somebody who just had great vision and was such a dreamer that he was always looking to, you know, past what was happening right now. And then this is going to happen. And this is going to happen. And so he was optimistic, but not, you know, I wouldn't say cocky. I mean, he was very superstitious. I mean,
inspirational motivator.
Yeah. I mean, he'd panic if he didn't have the right this and that. And he had the pregame thing that he had to do and all of it. But I remember him saying, you know, I'm going to just put me in a position to win at the end. He would tell his team, if you can get us in a position to win at the end, I'll figure out how to get the win with whatever we have to do with fouling or this or that or the other. And so, you know, I always felt like he was just like a hero. I mean, he could just accomplish anything. And I think that there was something special about that team. We can all relate to groups of people and times in our life when we're surrounded by just these people that just it becomes clicks. Magical. Yeah. And that it was something different that year, that it was just so magical. The players, I mean, I'm getting chills right now. They had such heart. Even now, if we all get together and see each other, the players, everybody starts right away crying. We're very emotional. So, you know, it's just, there was something about that year that just like everything came together. But yes, I mean, he was one of those people, he would speak it into existence. Like, this is the year we're going to win the national championship and this is how it's going to happen. And he would tell his team. And, you know, I unfortunately was never there when he did his locker room talks. But I mean, I hear from the specials that have been done and the players that they've talked to, I hear it was like something otherworldly. So I can't even imagine sitting, you know, they're listening to one of those pep talks at halftime or something. And whoo,
he can motivate the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah.
So they go into the NCAA tournament and your mother's stress level did not probably calm down from that point forward, because they beat Pepperdine by 2 points in double overtime.
Yep.
And all these games I'm listing right here, back when ESPN Classic was just playing games over and over, and especially like Jimmy V week, they would replay these. But Pepperdine, then they play UNLV, who was number 6 in the country. They beat them by 1 point. Then they have a little bit more comfort room. They beat Utah, but then they get Virginia again. But they beat Virginia by 1 point. And now they're going to Albuquerque. How did he feel going to his first Final Four? It had to be y'all were probably eating good that night.
Yes, but again, you know, I remember I see video. I mean, I remember my internal memory is us being in the hotel room, and my dad had a horrible fever. He was always sick during the season. He'd get himself sick by the end of it. And, you know, there was, with the air and the oxygen level, everybody was having trouble breathing. And so I remember it being very tense when we were all together as a family, when we were in private, because he wasn't feeling well and the team doctor was there and he was on antibiotic. But then when I watch video now, as soon as he would go out and interact with fans, he was as loose could be. He would be joking. He was doing the fight song. I mean, he really seemed like he was just living and breathing every moment and taking it all in. And so, you know, there were the two sides of that, of just feeling like, is he even going to make it to the final game? Because he was so sick. He had no voice. I mean, I just thought, this is terrible. But, you know, then seeing him perform and interact with the crowd and celebrate was just, it was, you know, pure Jimmy V then, pure Coach V. And he was celebrating with everyone that was there.
Yeah. And they go on to beat Georgia, and then in the national semifinal, and then the quote that he liked to poke at, you know where I'm going with this one, but a reporter had said that trees would tap dance, elephants would drive in the Indianapolis 500, and Orson Welles would skip breakfast, lunch, and dinner before North Carolina State wins the national championship. And then probably one of the most historic games in college basketball history. They still replay it all the time. You see the clip. But it was Derek Whittenburg heaving the last second shot up, and it was caught by Lorenzo Charles. Dunked it in as time expires. NC State beats a team that they were, you know, big underdogs against, Phi Slamma Jamma in Houston. And then the iconic moment of him running across, all across the court, looking for somebody to hug. What did he, when he would reflect back about that game, what were some of the things, especially post game, that stood out most to him?
You know, I think we were outside in the hallway, so we didn't see that shot. So, and you know, Houston was red as well. So we saw just, you know, a sea of red cheering. We didn't know what had happened. So I'm so glad that it's all caught on video so we can relive it over and over again. But, you know, images and snapshots that come to mind are absolutely him hugging Derek, and they had such a special relationship, and him, you know, just being with his players, and Thurl Bailey crying. I still can look at that and just, you know, cry with him. And just, you know, that idea that when we have our ultimate victories, that we want to celebrate with our team. And then, you know, my dad used to talk a lot about cutting down the nets. What is your cutting down the nets moment? When he would speak even to corporations and to other people, that even if you're not an athlete, we all should have a cutting down the nets moment where we know, like, this is when we've reached the pinnacle of our success. And that's what my dad had always dreamed about since he was a teenager, was cutting down the net. So that image, I have it hanging behind me. You can't see it, but where he's, you know, cutting down the net and waving it above his head. And I think so many people responded to that, not even if you weren't NC State fan, because it was the idea that anything can happen, that, you know, just that extraordinary experience and the underdog, and to watch my dad. And it was just such pure joy that you witnessed. None of it was staged. You know, it was just like everything was perfect. Him hugging his dad, center court, and celebrating with, you know, Rocco Valvano. That was something I'll never forget, because my grandparents were there. And then I think the second part that was totally unexpected for my dad and for all of us was coming back to North Carolina. And, you know, again, it's like getting chills again, but is the greeting that we got at the airport, because it was before security was as tight, obviously it is now. And I mean, there were people on the runway as we were driving to Reynolds Coliseum, which was, you know, on NC State's campus, all the overpasses, there were just fans everywhere, and, you know, holding up signs. And it, you know, it's like that paparazzi before there was paparazzi. And, you know, just seeing the way people felt and how they were celebrating and how they were responding to us. And then to go to the Coliseum and the players and my dad on stage, and, you know, at a stage there, and all of the sea of fans and students there. I mean, that's unforgettable. I'll never, you know, forget that, because he was so proud. Not only had he accomplished something that he had always wanted to accomplish, which is amazing when we're able to do that and accomplish our own victories, but when you can share it with that many people and have an impact in such a powerful way, I think that because he was such a people person, that was just amazing for him. It was amazing. So I just think that it it further cemented so many of his ideas and the way in which he lived, because, so much of what he had planned for himself had come to pass. And, he was so young. He was like 36, 37 years old. So, he still had all this energy and all this excitement. And, obviously sports and basketball had played such a huge place in his life. To be number one, to be able to say that you got there, it was a lot. It was a lot. So yeah, I remember coming home and people had painted our garage door red, and there were people lining the streets as we drove up to our house. I mean, it was just beyond what any of us could have imagined.
Oh, and he was probably reveling in it too.
Oh, I mean, just entertaining on a whole nother level. These were his people, and he just, and I think that the cool part about it is, at least from my perspective, he had done it his way. He had come to a place that maybe wasn't, this was a whole different world to us when we moved here to North Carolina, and he had done it. He had become, Coach V, but he had been true to himself and still been able to accomplish this and have so many people on his team and celebrate with him after this. It meant so much. I mean, that's why we've never left this area. My family, we still live here because this is our home. These are our family, and our community this is where we belong.
Do y'all still do a lot of interactions with NC State and the athletics over there?
Absolutely. So, before my dad passed away, they invited him to come back in the 83 team to be honored. And my dad was sick at the time. And that was a very, very emotional event, because it was almost like a reconciliation, and people were able to express how much they loved my dad and all the letters he got and everything. And so it was just beautiful. I graduated from NC State. My older sister did. And so we are very close. I mean, the basketball coach now, Coach Keats, lives around the corner from my mom. We see her all the time, see him and his family all the time. And, I think that right now, not only are we embraced by NC State fans, but towards the end of my dad's life, he kind of transcended just that team, and it became, just this community of people that support and love our family through the good times and the bad.
That's always awesome when it transcends past just sports into real life. And I mean, you just want to see how well he connected with that 83 team and how much they meant to him. Watch that 30 for 30, which is phenomenal, the survive and advance. What did you think of that when you watched it the first time?
I didn't know what to expect. And, Derek Wittenberg, one of his players on the 83 team, was the driving force behind that. And I, really had no idea. I thought I had seen some of the 30 for 30 specials, but I just really didn't know what to expect. And watching it, I was blown away.
Yeah.
But I was also very thankful for it, because it documented that year in a way that I could never, because even though I may have been there, I wasn't a player or a coach with him. And so to have that little time capsule of that time and see my dad and, just see the love and the emotion that they shared, the players to come back and tell stories. I remember watching it because they do detail a lot of the games that year as well. And I really did not think we were going to win some of them. I knew the ending, but I still, it's so captivating. You just get caught up in it and you can't believe the story. And once again, I think the 30 for 30 special transcends sports. You don't have to be a sports fan to watch it. I think there's so many things that you can take away from it. In that, my dad really talked a lot about, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? And so I think when you watch that special, you kind of see the extraordinary journey of, a group of people starting at one place and then, having that moment together, and then also being there for each other when, tragedy struck. And so it's suffering, it's joy, it's love, it's humor. It's such a great, I mean, they won awards for it. It's such a great story. And I'm very blessed to have that so that I can share it with my children and future generations and our family.
And they did such a good job with it too, because it was so much different than every other one. Like they were just sitting around talking, having a meal. It was really well done. I really liked it. And you're right, it really captured who he was and the impact he had on that team. And then even to go back a little bit, like you were talking about when he returned to Reynolds and that ovation he got and them chanting his name. And then you have the 83 team in tears listening to him speak. And it was that's also out there. I encourage people y'all just need to go sit down and spend a couple hours and just start throwing him in YouTube and watching all of this great stuff, and then watch the 30 for 30 while you're at it. But he left NC State. He started working with ABC and ESPN as a sports commentator, which, oh my gosh, he was a natural for that. And then you got him and Dick Vitale, the Killer V's together. Yeah. Oh gosh. And he I didn't notice it, but he actually turned down a job to go back coaching at Wichita State. How close was he to returning back?
I think the person that stopped that was my mom.
Really?
She said, I think the first 10 years of their marriage, they'd moved like 7 times or something. It was amazing how much, and she knew that was part of the job and she was fine with it. But once we got to North Carolina, we just felt like this was home and her girls were thriving and she just couldn't imagine picking up and moving, to Kansas or anywhere else. I think she was nervous about if my dad took like an NBA coaching job. That was another thought that he would that's a whole nother world as well. And my mom is kind of content to be in the shadows. She's much more reserved and, she won't like this, but her nickname was the Warden because my dad said she had so many rules to kind of keep her from getting in trouble, but that's what we called her. Oh, the Warden. She's telling us to go to bed or to be quiet. And so, they were definitely opposites all the way. Yeah. And so I think that what had happened at NC State had taken such a toll on our family and also on my dad physically. And so I think she wanted him to do something that wasn't as stressful. And so when the opportunity came for him to work at ABC and ESPN, I didn't think he'd stay there for long. I said, oh, he'll probably go back to coaching. But as you said, he was such a natural, for anybody who watches. And so many times I'm used to them criticizing me as a coach, but then I'll watch people criticize commentators and what they say and whatever. But the amount of research and the amount of knowledge that he had to have in order to do that job, whether he was in studio in Bristol, Connecticut, or whether he was at a game, I would just sit back and I'd be astounded. I would just say, wow, this is somebody who, again, knows about basketball, is passionate about it, and can entertain and educate as well. So yeah, I definitely think he maybe would have gone back to coaching if it wasn't for my mom saying, nope, if you go, you're going by yourself because we're not leaving. So yeah,
my wife can probably relate to her because in the military, it's moving from here to there. And my wife's getting at that point now where we're, I'm 12 years in and she's like, I'm looking to start settling down somewhere. Yes. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not Montgomery, but I want to settle down somewhere. So yeah, I can definitely relate with that. And then I'm not going to go too deep into this. There's an article in Sports Illustrated where they really go deep into him being diagnosed with cancer in June of '92. It just to tell everybody out there, just his humor and the even in a horrific situation like that, finding out the news. I think I read in the article how they said that the doctor came in there and told him, they're like, this is your spine. It's black. And he's like, well, you didn't turn the flash on. But I mean, just when he's, facing, adversity and life changing news, he still found some sort of humor in it, but he also talks about, coming home and breaking the news to all of y'all. But then he really did what, and really reading about him, going back, just looking at that article and then watching his ESPY speech, he makes you value life a lot more than what we do. We take it almost for granted. But him talking about coming home and taking his shoes off and, feeling his feet in the grass and feeling the trees and then just spending time. I think he had mentioned in one of them that he was researching a basketball game and he was doing all of his research and he's thinking, I need to be with my family. I need to be spending time with them. You started traveling with him during that time. How was that with him? The relationship, I'm sure, strengthened a ton which not that it wasn't, but I bet that.
Oh no, it was definitely such a gift. I'm so glad that I did that because, I was at an age where I was really leaving the nest. I was starting college and I had just finished my freshman year. And so at that age, your parents aren't your number one priority. And I remember my younger sister was in middle school and my older sister had already taken a job as in a pharmaceutical company. And it was like her first couple of years, so she couldn't take off. So I don't think anybody asked me, but I just said, I'm going to leave school and I'll be with dad so that mom can, take care of her youngest child. And also my grandmother, my dad's mom, Angela moved and with us, and we answered every piece of mail. I mean, whatever he got from anyone, he had to answer every piece of mail until his, fingers wouldn't work anymore because of the chemotherapy. And so I just kind of became a sidekick, and I would have never, ever probably seen him at ESPN or seen him commentate a game because again, I was starting to live my life and I was moving away. And so this kind of pulled me back. And there are so many sweet moments that I have to sit down and write my own book because there just are amazing moments where, the roles kind of reversed in that he was always this larger than life personality and could do anything. And he would push when he was in public. But then when it was just the two of us, or if it was him and just a family member, he would nobody really knew how sick he was. And he never wanted to be alone. He didn't want us to be at the hospital alone or at any time. So I would spend the night with him or my mom would, and he would, let us hold his hand, and he loved to have his scalp scratched. That brought him comfort. And so, it's very selfish for me to say this because of the circumstances, but it was the only time in my life I remember my dad being quiet and slowing down and just, again, us being able to have conversations that we probably would have had eventually, when you come back and you've raised your family and you sit down, and we thought we were going to have all that time, and we knew that we weren't. And I don't recall my dad ever, to me, he did not talk about death. He didn't cry. It wasn't anything like that. But I think we all knew that, as we saw him continue to weaken, that this was not going to end well. And so we allowed him to kind of dictate what it was he would want to do during these last months. And where my mom and I would have preferred to stay home and be quiet and just heal and try to navigate this as a family, he wanted to be as public and as open as possible. He wanted to stay working. He wanted to talk to anyone that would listen about what it was like to have terminal cancer. He wanted to try to form an organization that would fund cancer research when he was gone. He was already thinking about fundraisers that he would want. He was asking people to be on the board of directors of an organization. And I was like, what is going on? Like, this is crazy. Why is he so full of ideas and activities? And, whereas some of us, and, it all kind of culminated with that ESPY speech. But I just want everybody to know that he was, what you saw while he was trying to win a national championship was the same way he lived his life, the last year of his life. He had a unified team around him. He had a bold vision about what he was trying to accomplish, and he didn't give up. He persevered every single day. And then there was that dose of humor. And I have so many funny stories about, the final year and just being with him all the time. But that's really what he did that final year. And so it's not like I can say what you saw when he was, speaking to groups isn't who he was the last year. He was the same. I mean, I agree with you that he slowed down and he cherished and treasured times with people more than he ever had, but he was the same dad that he'd always been. Yep.
Yeah. And you mentioned something there. He wasn't going to give up, and that became like his motto there that he was really known for. And then, that brings us to the ESPY Awards. Yeah. And 10 years after winning the national championship, he's there. He's accepting the Arthur Ashe Courage Award, which I see sitting behind you. I think that caught my eye right when you were talking to me mid-sentence. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the ESPY Award right behind you.
Oh, but, yeah.
Do you think he had? Well, before I ask that question, if you have not watched this, I watched this like almost my mom and I have this thing that during Jimmy V week, they played on ESPN. we'd call each other, we'd watch it together. I have watched this speech more times than any speech I've ever watched before in my life. And I read you a message right before we got started about a guy who's out there instructing right now, and he always refers to it in his classroom. Do you think he had any idea that that speech would go down as one of the best speeches in not just sports, but in history?
You know, this is what I always answer when I talk about that speech, is that he was born to deliver that speech. If each one of us have a moment where we can say, this is our moment where everything's going to come together that we've experienced in life, and we're going to be able to kind of live our essence and be who we were intended to be. That single moment is encapsulates who my dad was so perfectly. So I think that one of the things people don't know is that he was so sick that his bones, he had cancer in his bones, just ached all the time. He couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. I did not think we'd be able to go to the actual awards. So we get there, and then we sit on the front row, and I noticed that he's got to walk up the steps to get to the podium.
And it was like 7 or 8 steps.
It was like a flight of stairs. And my mom's on one side and I'm on the other. And I'm thinking, this is what are we going to do? It was the inaugural ESPYs. This is the first year they've done it. We didn't really know what to expect. And so, he arrives there, he has no note cards, no teleprompter. He had been in the bed all day. So it's not like we had not seen him prepare at all for this.
He didn't practice that.
No, we stood. It was hard to get there. We flew on the plane with the Krzyzewskis, and I remember my dad got sick in my mom's purse. I mean, that's how sick he was. Like, if somebody would have told me he was going to get up and give a speech, I would have said, that's impossible. That's absolutely impossible. He does not have the strength or the ability to do that. So, Mike Krzyzewski helps him up to the podium, which again, just broke my heart, because it was just this to see two people who had competed so hard, and now we're just the friendship that had grown, which is, a whole nother story. And then Dick Vitale to give him the award. And then he gives the speech. And I'm like, what just happened? I'm sitting there going, he just kept going, and he was funny, and and I had heard a lot of those stories before. So that's what I'm saying. It was like, he somehow was able to roll together every experience he had ever had and how important sports was to him. But then at the same time, give us a glimpse into how it was facing terminal cancer. And he shared it with honesty and authenticity. And then also to leave us with hope at the same time. Like, we're watching him, and then he leaves us with hope, saying, I'm going to fight and don't give up. And then, again, no, not many people know this part of the story. So he comes back down the steps, and he sits down, and there's a boy choir that's singing afterwards. And I don't think I was crying, because I think I was just speechless, but he leaned over and he whispered in my ear, did I do okay? And that will be one of my most precious memories, because my dad wasn't ever someone who needed reassurance, especially not from his 20-year-old daughter. He was always so confident and just so, seemed so sure of himself. And that showed me how much this moment meant to him, that he needed somebody to tell him, me of all people, yeah, that was good. I think you hit it. That was perfect. So to me, I think that shows me not only how special and important the speech was, but also that it was from the heart. It wasn't something he had rehearsed. It wasn't something that had been staged and put together, and he knew exactly how it was going to unfold. I don't really know if he knew what he was going to say or do at all till he got up there. And to come back down and want that reassurance that he did okay. None of us, there's nobody who would have expected that this speech had the impact that it has had, and the work that the V Foundation is doing in his honor, and the legacy, and the people that are still. So yeah, I really, as a former teacher, I used to show this speech to like 11 and 12-year-olds, and they would love it. I mean, it just transcends sports, and whether you've had someone, I remember I was showing it in a class for my 6th graders, and there was a little girl in the back, and she started mouthing the words like she had heard it before to the speech. And she said, my dad's a cancer survivor, and we watch that every year to celebrate him being here and alive. So yeah, I don't think he knew. I don't think he had any idea or plan of what he was even going to do when he got up there. But I can tell you, without a doubt, I can answer the question that, he did more than just okay.
Yeah. Oh my
I
gosh.
think he killed it. Yep.
Yeah, he really, in his message up there, he impromptu. Now you just put a mic in front of him. He talks about announcing the V Foundation for Cancer Research. His laugh, think, cry. He says, if you can do those three things every day, that's a heck of a day. And if you do that every day throughout the week, that's a good week. That's a good life. And don't give up. Don't ever give up. But I love when they were trying to get him to wrap it up, the 30 seconds.
Yeah. I got tumors growing up all over my body. You think I care?
He's like, I got this guy yelling at me. That was because you didn't want it to stop. You wanted him but you knew he's in pain. But watching him, I think that's another thing too, is that how people, react to something. You hear it about like people when they're, a car flips over and they have this strength and he gets up on stage and he's walking around and he's acting out this, hitting his arm with the door, and you lose yourself in the moment that this man is in pain. He is hurting, and he's up there entertaining everybody, and he's got the room, and it's like he was feeding off of it, and it fueled him. And it's an amazing thing to watch.
There were so many amazing sound bites just from that one speech. And, I will go around to stores now and I'll, see something and they'll have like part of it printed on a pillow or, somewhere. And I remember going to like a little boutique and they had this leather bound journal and they had, portions of speeches from like Martin Luther King and, just these unbelievable song lyrics from, Bob Dylan. And then I go to this other one and I'm reading and it says, there are 3 things you should do every day. Laugh. And I'm like, oh, that's a good one. I wonder who said that. Like it just went right over my head to think that my dad would be on there. So I think I bought 10 of them. I was like, how many ever you have? I need one. But yeah, to me, I think sometimes at the time I didn't realize how powerful some of those I was 20 years old, so I didn't really get how powerful some of those things that he said, but yet how simple and what these philosophies he had used to live his life, and to see them and him share them, and at a moment when, a couple weeks later, very short time later, he passed away. And I think people were shocked because they remember seeing that speech and thinking, well, he must be doing okay. And then, him passing away, they were shocked because he seemed like he was so full of strength and power at that moment.
Yeah. I just thought of this, when he was on stage, one of the messages was laugh, think, cry. And he got that out of every person still to this day watching it. He still evokes every one of those from you while watching that. So it's just such a powerful, powerful speech. And now you mentioned he passed away April 28th, 1993. And his legacy, I think, is larger than he ever would have imagined. And it's a lot larger than his personality, which says a ton. But they have the Jimmy V Award that's now part of the ESPYs. How do you think he would feel knowing that now there's a Jimmy V Award given out to people like Stuart Scott and Craig Sager and all these amazing people?
I think he was so honored when they gave him one, the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. So I can't imagine, how deeply touched he would be that they carried that on. And from the little bit that I saw of him interacting with the individuals at ESPN and that he worked with and that he worked for, I think that they were just a big family, and the work without ESPN, the V Foundation would not exist. And so the fact that they, didn't just do something as a tribute to him and then forget about it, but they have invested, and spent decades, not only raising money for cancer research, but making sure that the money goes to where it does and does what it was intended to do. And they've honored my dad in such a remarkable way, because they haven't, they've kept his legacy and his essence alive rather than used him to do something they wanted to do, if that makes sense. It's just, we can't thank them enough. And we are astounded by what we've been able to accomplish. 2 years ago, I got to go to the Mayo Clinic and meet with some of our researchers, and don't want to get too medical, but one of the things that my dad really was passionate about was funding early stage cancer research, because that's when the breakthroughs happen. But those are the doctors that don't get a lot of the funding and the national funding, because they're just trying to prove something. They might just have an idea. And so we wanted to give small grants to those individuals, scholars that were in the laboratory doing work. And that's really how we started. And I got to meet some of our V scholars that were, from all around the world, and that were doing research in cancer centers across the country. And they had no idea who Jimmy V was. They knew who what the V Foundation was, because the V Foundation has such an extraordinary reputation in the cancer community, but they had no idea who Jimmy V was. So I got to sit with some of them and tell them about my dad. They were blown away by the story and about my personal story as well. And I got to sit there and learn about what they're doing with the money that we're funding. And so, 100% of every dollar that you give to the V Foundation goes to cancer research. The individuals that he asked to be on his board, like Dick Vitale and Coach Krzyzewski and Derek Wittenberg, and now new people who have joined on, they're still on the board all those years later. They're still part of his team. And so, just to know that if you live your life in such a way that you impact so many people, that they feel driven to make sure that your legacy it moves on and is protected, is something that is just such a tribute to the way in which he lived his life.
Yeah. And I've never met Coach K. I don't know Coach K, but I can guarantee if you ask him, those national championships and then his involvement with the V Foundation, he probably puts that V Foundation right up here. So afterwards, you graduate from state, and now it brings us to your part of the story. Yeah. So tell us about what it was that he said on stage that you started going through a hurdle that got put in front of you, but you kind of remembered something he said, and that kind of sparked something in you. If you don't mind sharing your story.
Absolutely. So when I was 33, I had graduated. I became a teacher. I actually worked at the V Foundation for many years and helped raise money. And so I was very close to the cause and the mission, and just felt really driven to continue with that. But then I had 2 children, and I decided I was going to take a step back. And when I was 33 years old, I was sitting in bed one night, and I noticed I had a lump in my right breast. And I thought, okay, what's all this about? And so I went to my doctor. They said, don't worry about it. You're young, come back in a couple months. And something inside me told me, no, I don't want to do that. And so I basically went and called my dad's oncologist, who was on our board at the V Foundation, and they got me in. And after lots of tests and lots of visits, they told me, you not only have breast cancer, but you have a genetic mutation called the BRCA2 gene that you inherited from your dad. And what was amazing was that when my dad was diagnosed 13 years prior, they didn't know he had that gene, because it hadn't even been discovered. So they didn't tell my sisters and I, your dad has this genetic mutation. You need to make sure that you are extra careful, because you might have this gene. They didn't know about it. There was no test for it at the time. So it's only through cancer research that, my life was saved. And the same doctors that treated my dad at Duke Cancer Center were now some of my doctors, the same nurses. And they were really hopeful for me, because we had caught it early. But because of the gene, I had a higher percentage of developing lots of different types of cancers. It was a lot of information for somebody who was 33. And I also, I think that even during the time that we are right now in 2021, everybody says, I want things to go back to normal. That's what we all want. Let's just go back to normal. So after my dad died, I really tried to kind of tuck all that away and just go back to normal. So to have cancer come back in our life again, in my family's lives, for my mom to have to go through this again, it was just nightmarish. And I remember I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old at the time. And I just decided, you know what, this is too much. I can't, there's no way I can fight this like my dad did. Everybody thought that I had his same spirit and his same courage, and they would scream, don't give up, don't ever give up. And people would write notes. And I was like, that's just not working for me. I'm not my dad. And also, I was really mad at my dad, because my other 2 sisters did not have the gene. And I felt like, what did I do to deserve this? So, there was just a lot of emotion going on at the time. And so I remember one day sitting in the kitchen, holding my bald head in my hands. I had started chemotherapy, and I decided in that moment that I was going to do what the doctor said, but my heart wasn't in it. I was going to give up. And I was kind of trying to make peace with, what that would look like to basically not survive. And it was as if my dad was sitting next to me at the kitchen table, and he just whispered, we're starting the V Foundation for Cancer Research. It may not save my life. It may save my children's lives. It may save someone you love. And I'd heard those words. I could recite that speech because I worked at the V Foundation. I'd said them all the time. But I was under the mistaken notion that the reason my dad had gotten up and done that last speech, and when he accepted that award, was for the world, because, my dad wanted to give hope to everyone. Yeah. But, why did he say that? It may save my children's lives. I thought to myself, what made him say that in that moment? And I realized that, I quite possibly was the someone that my dad loved, that he had put all of this in motion for me. And I said to myself, how can you give up? If your dad would have been given another year, another 5 years, imagine what he would have accomplished. And so right then and there, again, this was all internally, but I decided that I was going to, kind of take my dad's hand and let those lessons that he had taught me change the way that I was dealing with my cancer battle. And also to recognize that my ending could be different. Just because I had this gene, and just because I felt like I was kind of, following my dad's last 10 months of his life, that mine could be different, and that was okay. And so what my dad started kind of speaking into my life was basically, you need a vision. You need to have a cutting down the nets moment. You need to have something that is going to inspire you to keep moving forward. Because you're not going to just continue to get weaker and sicker. You're going to survive and thrive. And so that was really, he was a huge, huge part of that battle, that time when I, probably more than anyone else, just getting quiet and listening and remembering what I had shared with him when he was going through cancer, and, what would he say to me if he was here right now? And so that was part of my battle. And it's because of the gene. People look at me now and they think, well, you're a 15-year cancer survivor. Obviously you've beat it. But, because of the gene that I have, it's something that always has to be monitored, always has to be, visits have to occur yearly. And so it's not like I've been given you're okay, don't worry about that. It's something that, I continue to have my dad's ever-present voice in my ear, and to continue to show me and to teach me now as an adult. As I said before, I'm the same age he was when he passed away. And so I just can't imagine, I get to walk in his legacy now, and I get to survive, and he saved my life because of what he did and who he was. And that's something that there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about him and thank him for the courage that he had to enable me to survive.
Yeah. And that really made me change the way I view that speech, because I've always viewed it as just really inspirational. But then I see that it's almost like a little calling out to you, like, don't give up, and cancer research can essentially do what it did for you. And you're here, celebrating his legacy with us today.
Yeah.
And another thing you did that I just thought of, you did a TED Talk, an amazing TED Talk. And you're probably like me. I hear my voice on these podcasts when I'm editing, and I'm like, oh, I don't like going back and listening to we all kind of have that tendency. But your dad being the performer, the speaker he was, what did that mean to you to get that platform now to go out and speak to people and to do things like TED Talks? What does that mean to you?
It means everything to me. And I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because I think sometimes when we hear other people's stories, we think, well, that's really inspiring, but that can't happen to me. That extraordinary story can't happen to me. And so when I gave that TED Talk, I talked about legacy, and, everybody's legacy. I think we want to be successful in life, but we also want to be significant. We want to be able to impact the world and our community and our home life and our families. And so there was this idea in my head that when my dad had left footsteps, this amazing legacy that other people could follow, and you watch the 30 for 30 special, or you watch the SB speech and you're like, wow, this guy was amazing. And I never felt worthy enough to walk in his footsteps. I always felt like, he is something that I can never touch. And so, it took me about, a year to kind of develop the concept and the idea of what I wanted to share. And, what it meant to me to stand on that stage was, it was the first time that I boldly proclaimed that I am my father's daughter, and that I am not only going to walk in his footsteps because he invited me to do so, but that I'm going to leave footsteps behind for my children, for other people to travel as well. So that idea that we all have these gifts. It's kind of like an Olympic torchbearers. What I described it in my speech was that, you're holding the light and you're walking forward, and you want people to see that light shine upon them, and to give them hope, and to inspire them to use their gifts and leave, their impact behind. And so the idea was that, it was almost as if my dad was passing the torch to me. And he said, go tell your story. People know my story and they know what happened, but they don't know your story. They don't know what's happened since I passed away. And they don't know, the hope we've been able to do, and the money we've been able to give, and the legacy, and the people that he's still touching that I meet along the way. And, tell them about my grandchildren, and tell them about how you overcame cancer and what happened. Tell them your extraordinary story, because then we are together, then we're walking in the same footsteps, and we become even more powerful as, father and daughter. And so it took me a really long time to feel worthy to open up and to share my story, because I felt like, I would pale in comparison to him. But what I realized is that, we're not in competition, and that everything he did up until this point is for all of us. He was just shining a light. He was a light in the world. And if he inspires you because of what he did on the court, great. If he inspires you as a cancer survivor, that's amazing as well. If you hear about who he was as a father, or that he loved poetry, that's what we all are. We're all just lights that are supposed to shine on other people. And so, that's really what has changed. It's come with age, and it's come with wisdom, and it's come from, I think, talking a lot, to my dad, and him whispering to me, go tell your extraordinary story, and I'll be with you every step of the way. So when I gave that speech, he was there. He was on that stage. I showed video of him, and everybody said, how are you not just sobbing right now? This is just so emotional. And I said, because it's a celebration for me. It's, he's been with me on this journey. And so it's a celebration for me to stand here before you as a 15-year survivor, and to say I not only survived, but I thrived, and became somebody who I was always meant to be, because of my dad, and because of the legacy and what he had taught me.
And you've taken your incredible story and you've chronicled it on your website, which we'll give you all the info for that at the end of the episode. But you've got this, it's what, like a 7-part?
So, yeah, the focus on it is really what made me do it was when we were completely in our house all the time last year, the pandemic. My son, my youngest son, who's 18, inspired me to kind of just record a little bit about my journey with him. So it does focus on my dad and focus a little bit on my cancer, but it's more driven to talk about, my son and kind of the next generation of extraordinary people. And so that's what I did. And because I did that and I kind of put it out there, this whole movement and it started happening, and it took on a life of itself. Yeah. And so I realize now that my son Grant has a lot of Jimmy V in him, that's for sure.
Yeah. And the way you did it was so the flow was just so well done, because there's parts of it where you're listening and you're just in tears. You're like, oh my gosh. And even when you were talking about like that 3-year spurt you had early in Grant's life,
Yes.
and it's hard to hear because you're just like, oh my God, it's real. It's like real talk. But it ends so positive. And you had sent me the final piece of it, but talk to us about how much your boys mean to you and how much they motivate you every single day.
Well, you and I shared a lot about, just lessons we've learned as parents or struggles that we have, and we both got a little teary eyed, but, I do focus so much on my dad and that parent child relationship. And, what I found is there's just as much inspiration that I can share from being a mom and raising my children. And so I have 2 boys, and my oldest is 21 and he's a junior at Wake Forest, which everybody gasped. They're like,
How'd that happen?
How could you let him go to Wake Forest? I'm like, listen, it's not mandatory that we all go to NC State. And he said the school was too big. Okay. So don't, just stop. But, he is a tall, thin, gangly singer and artist and all of that. He knows sports at all. So again, it's just, I laugh when I think about it. And then my second son, when I was pregnant with him, about 3 months after he was born, we realized that he had suffered a stroke when I was pregnant with him, and they never knew why it happened. It was just a fluke. There wasn't anything wrong with me. There wasn't anything wrong with him. But as his mom, I kind of felt like it was my job to fix him. I just thought, as parents, it's our job to make sure that our kids have this perfect life and they're healthy and they're happy. And so I just, went way overboard of just trying to take care of him. And I remember he used to just kind of look at me. He was a beautiful child. And he would say, I'm not broken. All you need to do as as being my mom is love me. But I just couldn't do it. I honestly, I remember somebody saying to me, what would it take for you to just love him exactly how he is? And I said, I can't. He has to be perfect. And once again, just like when I was diagnosed with cancer, I wanted to give up. I was like, this is too hard. And so I remember early on a doctor saying to me, he's probably not going to walk. He's going to have cerebral palsy. Might not talk. He has severe apraxia. Every single appointment, it was another thing that was wrong with him. And if you're a parent of a child with special needs, it's a world that parenting is hard enough, but then you just put that extra layer of pressure on yourself as a parent, and it's so overwhelming. And so, then 3 years into his life, I had breast cancer. And one of the driving forces to make me survive and to not give up was I knew that my child needed me. He was 3 at the time and wasn't even walking. And so what started to happen, I think, was that as I started to heal and started to live my life differently as a survivor, as a cancer survivor, things didn't matter. I would celebrate anything he did. It was just like, listen, he may not have the life you think he's going to have, but it can still be an amazing one. And so celebrate everything he does and try to live in the moment, try to take one day at a time. And so I kind of changed the way I mothered quite a bit. And something started to happen, and that is my child became someone that inspires me every day, somebody that I look up to, someone that provides me life lessons that I needed to. It's almost like I was given the child that I needed to have in order to become the person I was supposed to be. And so when I stopped trying to write Grant's story, when I stopped thinking I was in control of everything and let him evolve into the beautiful human being he's supposed to be, like, I don't have all the answers. So all of a sudden now I was like, yeah, I'm his mom, and there's certain things I have to do, but he also has teachers, he has coaches, he has all sorts of people. So I invited a team in and said, how can we make this child have the best life possible? And everything changed. And he is now, he can walk and talk, definitely. And if you watch his videos, the thing that reminds me, 2 things that remind me about him and my dad is, well, he loves athletics and he loves sports and exercise and all of that, but also he lives life to connect with other people. He doesn't know, things aren't important to him. Money isn't important to him. It's about people. How can I love you? And how can I make you feel special? How can I make you laugh? And how can I let you know that I care about you? And so he lives his life in a way where He's just authentically real. He doesn't know how to lie, unfortunately. So even if I tell him, don't tell anyone that, he does. And he never gives up, never, ever gives up. So we started posting videos of him, and people during the pandemic, when they needed hope and they saw him not giving up, they were so inspired by his workouts. They were so inspired by his messages. And so it just turned into, he does podcasts, he's active in the Special Olympics, and I think I am going to have to get him an agent. I mean, I think that he's like destined for greatness. There's nothing he thinks that he can't do. And that's my dad. And his personality is so big, and he's so optimistic and so full of life and energy that he has really become, the person in my life that reminds me that anything is possible.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool when we were communicating through email, and you were saying how my dad would be so proud of him. And I could even, this shirt that, thank you so much for providing me, that I wear proudly. I could picture your dad doing that and out there working out with him, and, with his unitard out there working out with him. But
Grant would kick his butt, though. He's way stronger than my dad ever was.
well, like I told you, Grant motivated me after watching that video, because the next day I go out there and I start working out, and I'm like, all right, I'm done. I got one more set of such and such. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. And you mentioned his, getting into physical fitness. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about Daniel Ellis and the relationship he has with y'all, and how he has just sparked so much into both of y'all.
Yeah. The beautiful thing about both my dad and Grant, and what I've learned as I'm getting older, I am getting a bit smarter, is that what I found is that we all have these divine gifts. And when we use those gifts, something absolutely otherworld happens. And, we all don't have the same gifts. So when we compare ourselves to other people and we're like, oh gosh, that person won a national championship, how can I do that? Or he's so funny, I shouldn't be a speaker. And so what Grant has shown me is, when you just do what you can, when you use your gifts to bless other people, anything can happen. And so we decided that we needed a trainer. I was, and gotten quite out of shape. And as a cancer survivor, my body had gone through all sorts of different things. And then Grant was with cerebral palsy. He had gained a lot of weight. So this trainer, this 30-something-year-old guy, comes in to meet us. And I basically tell him, this kid has cerebral palsy and he's weak, and I don't know that he can even run. And I'm really out of shape. And he probably looked at us like, what the heck do you want me to do with you two? But it is that idea that if one person believes in you, that anything is possible, just like my dad did with his team in '83. I had never been involved in athletics. And so I had never pushed myself physically and knew what it was like to feel strong and to really have goals. And so Daniel made Grant and I feel like we were athletes, like premier athletes. And, I just look back at our first exercises, and he would say, take this rope and this fireman's rope and start, I can't do that. He's like, well, just try, and then he would, as a mom, he would ask Grant to do things, and I would want to step in and say, he can't do that because he has cerebral palsy. And then I'd watch him, do 10 reps of something. And so he made us believe that we were strong, that we were capable. And the three of us kind of became, and we laugh. We have so much humor. We laugh all the time. Grant, he had this funny just mantra that he started saying, was he would count down before every exercise, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bam. He had heard it on a show. And then he would say, I'm going to do what I can. That's what he would say, which he's like, if I can't do 12, I'll do 10. And we thought, what a great philosophy, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but bam, do what you can. So we started basically, just saying that every workout and cheering each other on and posting videos. And I can tell you without a doubt, when I look back over the past 3 years, we are completely different people. And it's all because one person believed in us and, pushed us to become something that we thought we could never do. And now Grant wants to run a race. He's got goals, fitness goals. He's out there, really? Rolling a big tire, flipping a tire. He does all sorts of things. And the other day, Daniel said to Grant, don't you ever get tired? And he said, only when I sleep. It's the only
His
time I get
grandfather.
tired. And he pushes us to be better. And so, there's just, once again, he's the captain of all of this. But, now we have people all over the country wearing our t-shirts, and whatever it is that they're facing in their own life, we send them a card that kind of tells them the instructions to living a BAM life. And we just, spread as much love and as hope as we can. And anybody that knew my dad and watches videos of Grant, they're always like, wow, that's his grandson for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm just so proud of, now I see these lessons trickle down and see what my son is now becoming. And I think I just would love to say to anybody that's struggling with anything in their life, just to know that, extraordinary things can happen every day, and that sometimes we get in the way of what is meant to happen. And so I think if you can use your gifts and your passions, and you can persevere and not give up, and you can when you close your eyes, keep thinking about those cutting down the nets moments. What is it you want to accomplish, and hold tight to those? I think that really, anything can happen, and it doesn't matter the circumstances that we find ourselves in right now, because my dad taught me we can rise above whatever's happening, and, we can live extraordinary lives.
Yeah, there's so many things you said right there that just kept sparking things that your dad has said, whether it's the speech where he talked about ordinary people do extraordinary things.
Yes.
The one you and I talked about with the packing your bag, who's Daniel, has his bag packed for y'all. He's been there
Always.
waiting. And it's just so many takeaways. And if somebody wants to learn more about, everything that y'all are doing, and to get one of these amazing shirts, where would you send them?
We would love it. I mean, that's the big thing that we've learned, is that we want a united team all around us, and we want to pour ourselves into other people as well. And there's so many people I've met that, have been changed by hearing me come speak to their company, or meeting Grant, or watching a video. And so if you go to jamievalvano.com, everything is on there, blogs and videos, and my dad's speech and links. And I'm hoping to be able to continue to share our journey with everyone, but also to hear about, other people's extraordinary journey and what they're accomplishing.
It's a loaded website. I mean, there is tons of stuff on there. I went on there the other day, and I was like, it's usually when people have a website, it's like, a couple of links here and there, but yours is just, and it's powerful stuff. It's just, it's a lot on there, but it's really, really good. And proceeds from sales of the shirts, they are donated, is this correct, to the Special Olympics North Carolina?
We do a portion of the proceeds of everything we sell that's BAM to the Special Olympics. We've gotten involved with them and their great cause, and Grant does videos for them and virtual workouts. And unfortunately now that the athletes can't be in during the events, doing the events in person, but just the spirit of that organization is phenomenal. And, it's in every community everywhere. So we continue to hope that our relationship grows with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And a couple of things here to kind of wrap this up. We've talked a lot about your dad throughout this, but what are some of the things you've picked up on through your relationship with your mom and your sisters that you find yourself doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, my mom is the ultimate nurturer. So what she gave me, I feel like I'm a pretty good mix of my mom and dad. And, so my mom is the caretaker, she's the one who makes sure that you're fed and makes sure that the house is clean. And so so much of my mothering I've gotten from her, just taking care of other people. And so, during this difficult time that we're in right now, it's so important to remember to take care of yourself and mentally and physically. And so, even though my mom was like a quiet strength, but she's that person who, reminds me that you need to slow down and you can't always be, she would tell that to my dad, Jim, she would tell him all the time, I can't sew the seam of your pants up again, because he'd constantly be splitting them when he was coaching. I mean, he was a whirlwind, a tornado of activity where my mom wasn't. And she was just that quiet person who would make the family dinners and kind of lead all of that. So that's what I think I've carried on from my mom the most. And she not only was there beside my dad when he went through his cancer battle, but she was there for me every single treatment and surgery. And so that is invaluable. No matter how old you are, you always, still need your mom to come take care of you. And so she's there for that. My other two sisters are amazing human beings. My older sister she is brilliant. She's a chemist. She is just, all numbers, where I'm all touchy-feely. And so what she teaches me the most is, she has made me a better person because she lets me see things from different perspectives. She's an amazing aunt and loves my children, and especially my son Grant, in such a way that is so meaningful to me. And I'm probably most like my younger sister, Leanne. She unfortunately was just in middle school when my dad passed away. And so one of the things that I'm really, passionate about with her and my niece and nephew is just making sure that my dad is still a part, that our family is still a big part of their life, even though we don't live, she actually had the nerve to leave North Carolina and live somewhere else. But, those are the lessons that I learned from them, is just, you're so much more powerful when you're together. And I really think that we all thought we were going to have years and years and years after my dad retired and slowed down to kind of just enjoy family time. And that didn't happen. And so it's a reminder to us how we need to value each other and love each other and, have peace and forgive, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so I know we all say that, but I really do think that as a family, we do that. We put it in practice. And so that's been a gift.
I think now a lot of people tend to be, they struggle with being present with each other. Just because you're around someone doesn't mean you're present with them. And that's something I've really focused on doing a lot more with my family. And what's the one leadership trait that you think, you kind of hinted at this a minute ago, one leadership trait you think that your father exhibited or taught you that at the time you didn't necessarily see it, but through interactions with Grant, you're like, this is my dad?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, there's so many. I think the thing that bothered me the most growing up about my dad was he was such an oversharer with people, in that there was nothing off limits.
Yeah.
It was like nobody was a stranger. And I always was a little bit bitter, thinking, everybody gets to feel like that they're close to you. Like, as your daughter, I want to feel like I have something special just with you.
Yeah.
But you love everybody, you love everybody, you hug everybody, you talk to anyone who wants to talk to you. And that used to really bother me. And that he was so accessible to his players and his coaches. And, he was and that, to me, that is a form of leadership, as far as like, he always was trying to impact other people. The focus wasn't just on him and what he wanted to do. And it used to make me really mad, because I'd be like, tell those people to go away. We're trying to eat dinner, or when somebody would call him. But, those were the same gifts that when he was trying to ask his players to perform, or whether he was forming the V Foundation, it was because he was so open and so transparent, and so just like, there was nothing that was off limits. And because my son has special needs, he doesn't know prejudice. He doesn't know anger. He doesn't know jealousy. He doesn't know, anything political. It doesn't matter to him. You're not rich. You're not poor. You're not tall or short. He loves people, every person. I mean, one of the things he did last year was him and I were trying to fill the time. And so he started creating these love collages, where he would think of people he would want to create a collage for. And he made like over 100 of them with my help.
Those.
Because he needs help cutting. And we posted pictures, and people were so touched, teachers, and they were just so touched that he would take the time to do that. Just like my dad would write every single person back. Because again, it was before like emails and stuff. I'd say, really, do you really have to write that person down, a letter back just because they sent you something? And he said, yes, they matter. And I remember us leaving the grocery store the other day, and the woman behind the deli counter was bantering with Grant, and we walked away. He said, we really need to make her a love collage. And, most people don't even look at the person that's cutting the meat. We're like on our phone. We don't even connect.
Mm-hmm.
We don't say thank you. And so beyond a shadow of a doubt, the thing that Grant and my dad have most in common, other than the fact that they are just never give up, is that people matter to them, and they know that they cannot accomplish anything in their life without people. Like, that's what matters. My dad always had to have a team around him in order to accomplish what he couldn't do alone. And the same thing with Grant. He doesn't want to be out there exercising by himself. He wants to be with his BAM team, with his trainer, and he wants to be, every day doing something to make someone feel special. And that's what I learned from my dad and from Grant. And what I found is that when I do that, when I focus on other people, and when I'm open to connecting and really being authentic and sharing with someone what's really truly going on in my life, I always walk away feeling absolutely blessed and excited and energized. And I don't quite share as much as my dad did, as much as Grant does, but it's just, Grant doesn't know a stranger. He's just, everybody is worthy of his time and his energy and his love. And if we all lived like that, the world would be such a beautiful place.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
every single day he reminds me of who I want to be.
Yeah. Wow. That inspires me too. I mean, it's just be nice to people. It's on here, the card. Yeah. Be kind, love people. Last question for you. 50 years from now, I think we know where your dad's legacy is going to be. But what do you want people to say about you 50 years from now?
I think probably the thing that I'm most proud of is just my children, and, to see them going on and living the life that they were meant to live. But what I hope is that there is a light, that I'm carrying a torch right now, that I can hand off to another generation, and that they live their life just like what we just talked about, because I am committed, with whatever time I have left, to be kind and to love other people. And I don't have to, it doesn't have to be a grand thing that there's, a statue built for someone, or a building, or a foundation. I think that light that we leave behind and we scatter, I want it to touch as many people as it possibly can. So if in 50 years from now, a group would gather, and, whether they did it physically or not, and everybody could share, multiple ways that I changed them, or touched them, or gave them hope, whether it's, through cancer survivorship, whether it's just sharing stories about raising children and not giving up, or about legacy and the gifts that my father left me. Those are the things that I want to live on, through my children and through everybody that I come in contact with. So, I just imagine like all these little sparks going out into the world, and you may never know whose light that you have, caused that flame to kind of grow inside of them. You may never know that, but it doesn't matter, because the world will be a different place because you were in it.
Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing experience getting to sit here and talk to you. I've been holding back tears on a lot of the stuff that you've been saying. This has been really emotional. Getting to celebrate, just your family, not just your father, but your family all the way up to Grant, and the similarities that those two have is incredible. And you are a prime example of everything he set up there on stage at the SB Awards, and such an inspiration for a lot of people. You definitely stood out to me as somebody that I wanted to have on here because the message is so powerful that you can spread to so many people. So I cannot thank you enough for your time. And definitely, folks, go to her website, as she mentioned, Jamie Valvano. Go over there, .com, check it out. And you also have a 321 Babam website as well, right?
It's a page that's on there, a landing page, and you'll be able to go to it and see all the things that we're doing.
Yeah, and you can see the collages she's talking about. I saw those the other day. It's phenomenal, and it inspires me too to be, I think I'm, you ask anybody, they're gonna say, oh, I'm an amazing parent, but I'll find myself getting in spots where I'm like, I know I need to be spending more time with my kids. I know I need to do more. So just watching the two of you interact with each other motivates me as a parent, still to this day. So I can't thank you enough for doing this. What final words do you have for everybody listening?
Well, I just want to thank you because, you never know why you're brought into someone's life or why you're meant to connect. And I was able to learn about your extraordinary story, and it touched me. And so I know that we were brought together for a reason. And so I just want people to, sometimes we're so busy that, again, we overlook the moments when there are just divine things that are supposed to happen. And so I know this is just the beginning, of our friendship and things that we're going to learn from each other. And so I thank you for the work that you're doing in sharing other people's powerful stories in the hopes that, you're just lighting fires everywhere you go of just creativity and energy and love. And so I'm thankful for you. And just to remind people that when you are love, when you spread love, and when you spread kindness, these wonderful relationships happen, and it enriches your life in such an amazing way. So I thank you for that.
Oh, that means a ton coming from you. I mean, this is a Tar Heel and a wolf pack sitting here having this conversation. So this is rare, but no, I totally agree. I'm so glad I made this connection with you. Well, ma'am, thank you very much for taking time. And folks, that is going to conclude this episode of Shadows Podcast.